When it comes to World War II, most people remember the heroic battles on the Eastern Front, the Normandy landings, or the battle for the Pacific Ocean. But few people know what happened in the hot sands of North Africa, where a dramatic story of confrontation unfolded. Here, amid endless dunes and sun-scorched land, Australian soldiers earned a reputation that made even the most experienced German military leaders shudder. Erwin Rommel is the legendary fox of the desert, a genius of military tactics, a man who was feared and respected on both sides of the front. This German field marshal has been through many battles and has seen a wide variety of opponents. But it was about the Australians that he spoke with special awe, calling them immensely big and powerful men. What made this battle-hardened general feel such respect for the soldiers of a distant continent? Imagine a night attack under heavy fire, when a reasonable person would lie down in cover, and the Australian diggers, as the Australian soldiers were called, go into bayonet charge, despite the enemy's curtain of fire. Or the moment when Rommel personally photographs the advancing Australian infantry, risking his own life. He was so impressed by what he saw. He kept these photos in his personal suitcase among the most valuable memorabilia, the highest honor from a man who is not prone to sentimentality. Australia's entry into the war. On September 3, 1939, Great Britain officially declared war on Nazi Germany after the latter invaded Poland. As a member of the British Commonwealth, Australia immediately joined the Allied war effort. The young nation, which still maintained close ties with Great Britain, could not stay away when the world was plunging into the abyss of global conflict. However, the real test for the Australian troops did not begin in Europe, but in a completely different theatre of operations, in the North African desert. After the rapid defeat of France in the summer of 1940, Italian dictator Benito Mussolini decided to seize the moment and expand the Italian colonial empire. He ordered his 10th Army, stationed in Libya, to launch an offensive against Egypt, which was under British control. The Italian offensive began in the autumn of 1940. Mussolini's troops crossed the Egyptian border and advanced almost 100 kilometers into the territory before suddenly stopping. The Italian commanders demanded reinforcements and did not dare to continue moving, although in fact there were no serious obstacles in front of them. They had no idea that the British forces in the region were extremely limited. At that time, the Western Desert was defended by about 36,000 soldiers and only 65 tanks. If the Italians had shown more determination and continued their offensive, they could well have captured the whole of Egypt, including the strategically important Suez Canal. This would be a disaster for British interests in the Middle East and could change the entire course of the war in the region. Operation Compass. The British command, realizing the precariousness of its position, developed an audacious plan codenamed Operation Compass. Initially, the plan was rather modest: to conduct a large-scale raid to intimidate the Italians and force them to stop further attacks. It was planned to strike at several Italian fortified camps in Libya, demonstrate strength and retreat. However, the operation, which began in December 1940, exceeded all the wildest expectations. British and Indian troops dealt a crushing blow to the Italian positions. The enemy was completely unprepared for such a development. It was at this stage that the Australian forces joined the campaign. The Australian 6th Division was sent to the North African desert to reinforce British troops. These soldiers, known as Diggers, a nickname inherited from the First World War, arrived in the region to relieve the Indian 4th Division. This happened just 6 days after the start of the British counteroffensive, and the Australians had to show what they were capable of. The first serious test was the storming of the Bardia fortress in January 1941. The Australian 6th Division attacked the fortress with unprecedented force. The result exceeded all expectations. 40,000 Italian soldiers surrendered, and the Australians captured 462 artillery pieces. It was an impressive victory that immediately attracted the attention of military strategists around the world. But the Australians weren't going to stop there. The next target was Tobruk, another important fortified point on the coast. On January 21, 1941, after a fierce assault, the city fell. 25,000 Italian soldiers were captured and 256 guns were captured. The pace of the offensive was so high that even the enemy did not have time to organize an effective defense. On February 4, 1941, the Australian 6th Division captured Benghazi, a major Libyan city. The speed with which the Australians advanced through the desert, crushing one Italian position after another, was amazing. Even Erwin Rommel, who would soon arrive in North Africa at the head of the German Afrika Corps, later noted the incredible speed of the Australian offensive. Operation Compass was a tremendous success, far exceeding its initial modest goals. What was intended as a limited raid turned into a full-scale offensive that routed Italian forces in North Africa. During the operation, the Commonwealth forces captured more than 138,000 prisoners, hundreds of tanks, more than 1,000 artillery pieces and many aircraft. At the same time, Allied losses amounted to about 10% of the infantry, a surprisingly low figure for such large-scale operations. The success of the Australians seriously undermined the Italian position in the region and forced Germany and Italy to urgently send reinforcements to Libya to protect Tripoli and prevent the complete collapse of the Italian presence in North Africa. It is at this moment that Erwin Rommel enters the scene with his Afrika Korps. Meanwhile, the Australian 6th Division was withdrawn from North Africa and sent to Greece to counter the impending German invasion. However, other Australian units remained in the desert, and it was up to them to face Rommel and his battle-hardened troops. What did the German generals think of the Australians? When German officers began to analyze the situation in North Africa and the causes of the Italian defeat, they quickly came to the conclusion that the British and Australian troops were well trained. The German generals admitted that they were faced not with amateurs, but with professional, well-trained soldiers who were able to operate effectively in the extreme conditions of desert warfare. One of the notable episodes occurred during the Battle of Tobruk. A group of Australian soldiers made a bold attempt to attack a German ammunition depot. The operation failed, and the Australians were captured. When the prisoners were brought to Rommel, the field marshal was amazed by their physical characteristics. In his notes, he described them as immensely big and powerful men, admiring their bravery and fortitude even in captivity. During the First Battle of El Alamein, Rommel clashed with the Australian units to the fullest extent. He noted in his reports the exceptionally strong artillery fire and the well-built line of defense of the Australians. Their positions were so well fortified and defended that German attacks repeatedly crashed against them. In letters to his wife, Rommel wrote that the Australians were worthy opponents who fought with extraordinary tenacity until late at night. He mentioned the numerous attempts of the Australians to break through the German front and their success in capturing prisoners. He was particularly impressed by the night attack on July 26, 1942, when the Australian units went on the offensive, despite the powerful curtain of fire put up by the German artillery. In his notes and diaries, Rommel repeatedly called the Australian and New Zealand infantry excellent. This was not a simple compliment out of politeness, but a recognition of the enemy's real military prowess on the part of one of the greatest tacticians of the Second World War. The German soldiers who fought against the Australians constantly noted their incredible endurance and fortitude in battle. After one of the battles near El Alamein, Rommel wrote in his diary that the defense created by the Australians made it almost impossible to take their positions. It was a bitter admission from a commander accustomed to victories and breakthroughs. The Australians created defensive lines that could stop even the renowned Afrika Korps. German soldiers said that the Australians fought with particular ferocity and determination. Some Germans even compared them to wild animals because of their aggressive fighting style. Australian soldiers were known for not always considering the capture of prisoners a priority unless there was a special order. They preferred quick, decisive action and did not waste time on ceremonies. This created a special reputation. Australians were feared no less than they were respected. The German soldiers knew that facing the Australian units meant a fierce, uncompromising battle with no hope of an easy victory. Relations with the British command. Interestingly, with all due respect to the Australian soldiers, the Germans did not always rate the British command as highly. The Afrika Korps respected the Australians as opponents on the battlefield, but believed that their potential was not always fully exploited by the British generals. This was typical of the attitude of many towards the British military leadership of that period: brave soldiers, but not always effective strategic planning. There is a well-known, though not documented, story about a meeting between Field Marshal Montgomery and Rommel through intermediaries. Montgomery allegedly noticed that the war in the desert had become much more difficult after his appointment as commander. To which Rommel replied that if he had the opportunity to choose troops to go through hell himself, he would choose the Australians. Unfortunately, the original source of this impressive quote could not be found, so it may not be real, but its very popularity speaks to the reputation of Australian soldiers. One of the most unusual evidences of Rommel's respect for Australian soldiers was the discovery made after the war. Rommel's family hid his personal suitcase with photographs and memorabilia. When the suitcase was discovered, among the many photographs were photographs of the Australian infantry going into a bayonet charge. These photos were taken by Rommel himself in real combat, when he risked his own life being close enough to the front line. The fact that the German field marshal saw fit to capture this moment and keep it among his personal belongings speaks volumes. For a military professional at this level, this was the highest form of recognition of the opponent's skill. Australian soldiers charging with fixed bayonets under enemy fire is an image that impressed Rommel so much that he wanted to preserve it forever. In the era of modern warfare, where tanks and artillery played a key role, the bayonet charge was an anachronism, but it demonstrated the willingness of the Australians to go to extreme lengths to achieve the goal. Most Australian soldiers, like soldiers of all armies, just wanted the war to end as soon as possible so they could return home. They did not seek fame or recognition, they performed the duty in the incredibly difficult conditions of the scorching desert, where the temperature exceeded 50 degrees during the day and dropped to almost zero at night. Their contribution to the Allied victory is often underestimated in the general history of the Second World War. When people talk about the North African campaign, they usually recall Rommel and Montgomery, the Battle of El Alamein, but rarely mention the decisive role played by the Australian, New Zealand and other parts of the Commonwealth.